And at some point in time, you can encourage me, I hope. You guys can encourage me, but I have a card I'm going to read from, but I'm going to just read the English blessing. I'm still working on the Torah, the Hebrew portion of it. So at some point I will attempt it, but I don't want to stammer. So blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of the Torah. Amen. So today we are going to be talking on the Torah portion of Vayeishev, and he settled. Some interpretations say, and he lived there. This is a study done by Tony Robinson. Am I loud enough? By Tony Robinson, Restoration of Torah Ministries. He has a website that he has available, all these Torah portions. So feel free to go to them and download them. I'm on, but I'm not turning. There it is. So it has been broken down into 4 parshas. 2 of them, of course, if you look at the Pei and the Shemach, 3 of them are paragraphs, and 1 is a open portion, indicating that it's a new, just a typical, kind of like a space. So there are kind of 3 broken down into 3 parshas. But before we begin, it's our famous riddle of the day. See if you can figure this one out. I know Teresa didn't get the answer this time. So what word in the English language does not follow, or does the following? What word in the English language does the following? The first 2 letters signify a male. The first 3 letters signify a female. The first 4 letters signify a great, while the entire world, it should be word, that was my error. The entire word signifies a great woman. What is the word? Julie? You are not correct. Good try. Madam? It doesn't start with the food. It doesn't start. The first 2 letters don't signify a male. Ma, ma'am. But mad man. No. Any takers? Mr. Kelsey, welcome.
Hello.
Any taker? Riddle? I know riddle. It's a riddle. Anybody? It is a heroine. See? A heroine as in Ruth or Esther. The first 2 letters signify a male, he. The first 3, her. What was the other one? The first 4 letters signify a great, hero. And the entire word signifies a great woman. Huron. There you go. There's getting our thinking caps on for the morning. Today, usually he breaks down the Torah portion. He looks at a parsha, and then he looks at the whole parashat, and then he connects the half Torah portion, half Torah. It's something else. What's half Torah? And he also then connects it to our Messiah. But this parsha, he does not look at just an individual parsha. He actually dives right into the parashat. So diving into the whole parashat, which is all 4 of those, starting from Genesis 37:1 to 40:23. We are going to search the parashat. The objective is to thematically uncover, see how passages relate to each other, and gain new insight on how to interpret it based on those thematic connections. He wanted to point out that understanding the last 4 portions of Genesis at Bereshit at the literal level, or the parashat, there's an introduction. We have to remember, that the Torah does a couple things. One, It's more to do with the future than the past. It is a prophetic book intended, above all things. And it has a prophecy, a message from the Holy One for all generations, not just some. And I also added to it a little menorah, which to me always reminds me of a chiastic structure. It always has a theme or connection where you can connect the past from to the future. And I'm not turning. Sean's trying to keep me on my toes. Quick review. There's a couple things he has us doing. If you want to, it's on page 4. Now we're on page 5. A quick review. Genesis 1 through 3. We want to talk about Genesis 1 through 11 to recap what we're going to be talking about with this parsha. And the Genesis 1 through 3, the first chapter through the third chapter, is an account of the creation and the nature of mankind. From Genesis 3 to 11, we read many stories concerning Adonai's dealing with mankind as a whole, not just individual. Then starting Genesis 12, we're introduced to Abram. And then in Genesis 12, that was a repeat, we're introduced to Abram. That's 2. I got 2 mistakes already. It's going to be interesting. I might have done this on the fly. So we're going to read Genesis 18, 17 through 19. And I left my phone. No, wait, right here. Does somebody have, by chance, Genesis 18, 17 through 19? Do you have a mic? Let's read it. And I'll get my Bible up. What was it again? Genesis 18, 17 through 19. In red. Even in red.
Ahem.
Got it? Yep.
The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him."
In Genesis 18, 17 to 19, it's when he now has moved to dealing with one person, Abram. He speaks with him. He tells him how his descendants are going to be like the stars. He's implementing justice and righteousness, but he wants that family to be a light unto those people to be a light unto the world. Those are the kind of themes that you'll catch. 2 themes from the beginning, the book of beginnings, often known as Genesis. Adonai will not allow sin to stand. It's the inevitable consequence of sin is judgment. And the second theme of the book of beginnings, the Holy One wants to create a model nation, one founded upon righteousness and justice. Adonai will overlook sins in the lives of those, or will Adonai overlook sins in the lives of those he has chosen to pioneer this holy nation? Does he overlook the sins in their lives? Nope. They do not get special treatment. In fact, it's from beginning to end, we see where they do get those judgments. For example, Jacob sinned through deceit and lying lips when he stole Esau's blessing. Can you tell me which event in Jacob's life was obviously meant as divine judgment, reprimand for Jacob's sin of deception? Furthermore, what thematic evidence can you support, reading it, that it was a divine reprimand? Anyone?
He was given Leah instead of Rachel.
Yes.
And then Laban changed his wages, I think, 10 times.
10 times? And how was he given Rachel, or Leah? Is there a connection between why he was given the first wife, or Leah versus Rachel?
Well, and it was a custom, according to Laban, in their country, that the firstborn woman had to be married, given in marriage first, before they could give the second.
Interesting. Yes, good point. A question? Those are at the end. I'm just go ahead.
So didn't Jacob get Esau's birthright when?
Yeah.
Okay. So then how, if he got his birthright, then why wouldn't he have supposed to have gotten the blessing of the firstborn? And the other part of that is Jacob didn't want to do that, but his mother said, no, you listen to me, and you know, if there's a curse, it'll be on me.
Right.
We have a instruction to honor our mother and father. And did he, I suppose any way he went, he would have sinned because he wouldn't have been honoring his mother. His mother knew what was going on, knew of God's plan or blessing for Jacob. So I'm kind of confused as to, I obviously Jacob then was given quite a bit after the father-in-law did what he did.
So then your final question?
It has to do with Jacob's sin. Did he truly sin, or was he following his mother's instructions? He
Yes,
he
and
got
yes,
the birthright.
and
He
yes.
should have had the blessing. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I'm still listening, but I need a pen. If I could, you know, that's a good question, and we talked a little bit about that when we were in that chapter. And you'll see maybe why, you'll see the sin that he didn't get away with it, you'll see it coming up. Now, as far as the blessing and all that, that goes into a much more, the sod level, that goes a much more deeper level. And we could go into that, but then we would lose a lot of time for the rest of the study. However, we will see later on how it connects that he did get a reprimand for his actions. Yes?
So much like Jacob deceived his father, his sons deceived him about Joseph.
And now we'll also discover in this parshat, sorry, we're not doing the individual parsha this time. What we're talking about, what you're hearing there, what you pointed out, is that measure for measure chastisement. A divine reprimand occurred with Leah given to Jacob instead of Rachel. Even though he had labored for 7 years for Rachel, we know this to be true, which is what Mike pointed out, because Jacob was deceived in the same manner he deceived his father. Matthew 7:2, which states, by which I added to this, by measure you will use, it will be measured back to you. You've often heard the very beginning of Matthew 7, or earlier in Matthew 7, it says, do not judge. And I just kind of have to put this in here. This is kind of my thought on as I was going through this. I think sometimes we often have heard, by the way, whenever you see a squirrel, that lets me know that I'm putting my 2 cents in. It reminds me to acknowledge that it's me talking and not necessarily Tony, because a lot of times I'm speaking on behalf of what he presents. And so, but back to the measure for measure, we forget about, he says, by the measure you will use, it will be measured back to you. We often hear, oh, we're not supposed to judge. And we forget the rest of it, and that was the point. And I think sometimes we as people as a whole get confused we think of judge being a noun, meaning that official that's appointed in the case of our judicial system that executes a sentence, versus when you use it as a verb, it is just in the form an opinion or to a conclusion about something. So sometimes I think when we use the term judge, we're not supposed to judge people. We think it's a noun when really we're just talking about a verb. In other words, we're just forming an opinion or a conclusion, and we're not executing a sentence, so to speak. So with Jacob and Rachel, Isaac's eyesight was very poor. He couldn't see, which we're going to be talking about, what we pointed out. Jacob could not see that Rachel had been replaced with Leah because of the darkness in the tent. Esau should have gotten the blessing, which is what we were talking about. But Leah received the blessing of marriage first, which is what Mike pointed out, through the deceit of Laban. This second event made up or made right or compensated for the deceitful reversal of the first event. I found that to be interesting. And so with that, we see that the divine judgment, that measure for measure, always comes to play for each of us. Then he goes into talking about getting off to a bad start. Genesis 37:1. I'm going to open it up and read it real quick. 37:1. I thought I would. Sorry, I'm there now. And Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Jacob, and this one says, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed. Notice it's two different words, in the land of Canaan. And we are going to see that right away he's there, but everything immediately starts off on a bad start. Genesis 37:2. It says, these are the family records of Jacob. At the age 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bela and Zilpah and his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Notice the word family records. In some places it says generations, other places it says chronicles, and the actual word is Talmud, and that was actually last week or maybe the week prior's Torah portion. I'm drawing a blank, but either last week's or the week before. No, it had to be the week before because we didn't do it last week, did we? So the week before, that was a Torah portion. But what is that? Is it actually a history? Or what are you seeing here? Is it a history, a list, or is it a list of descendants? What do you think? The young man was working with, is it a history or is it chronicles? Does it give Jacob's lineage? Joseph's lineage, sorry. If you look at it, it looks more like history than it is. Why is that? They say history, and that is because a deeper purpose of the narrative that begins here and doesn't end until Genesis 50. Pay attention to that. It's interesting. A narrative starts, and that's what we're talking about, not off to a good start. Remember that Jacob is also often associated with Israel, and the narrative of the Torah are prophetic shadows of future events that will occur in the lives of the descendants of the patriarchs and matriarchs. This is a first hint, remez, that the stories that are following are prophetic in nature. So rather than in previous times where he listed actual chronicles of the family, here it's not. Should give you an indication. We talked several studies ago. Remember we talked about whenever the word kind of throws you're expecting to see this, but you don't. We should probably pay attention to that. And by the way, I just threw this in here, the remez. Keep in mind that it is a pardes, and that is that you have the peshat, the literal, the remez, which is a hint, the dirash, which is a sermon or a metaphor, comparison, illustration through the teaching. This here would be more of a dirash. And then there's the sod, the secret. And we'll talk a little bit more about secret a little later on. But here we're hinting at he is trying to tell us something. What is he trying to tell us? Our Father. Question, why is this important? Why is it important that the family records of Jacob at 17, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers, and in another form of scripture, I didn't write down the two, but in another scripture, it said Joseph at the age of 17 was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock. Who remembers a couple studies prior where we talked about a shepherd and what that indicated? Anybody remember? Had to do with a shepherd versus somebody in the land. At the very beginning, somebody was murdered. Remember? Strike a memory? No? The question is, why is this important that Jacob is identified as tending sheep? Do you remember we had the conversation? Huh? Joseph, I'm sorry, I said Jacob. Sorry, Joseph up there. Well, Torah already hints that Joseph had some degree of righteousness. Remember we talked about unrighteous characterized as being earth of the field, flesh, Cain, Esau, emphasizing our carnal nature, and then the righteousness are characterized as being shepherds or sojourners. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, Yeshua. And so whenever you see them talking about describing somebody as tending to sheep as a characteristic, that is implying they were righteous versus somebody who might have been plowing the field. And not saying that there is anything wrong with plowing a field, it's just an identification that points to when you see somebody being as a characteristic, instead of saying they're righteous, he describes them as tending to sheep. There's that characteristic. They're almost kind of synonymous. Is that the word I'm looking for? Here's another important question. Does the fact that Joseph was with the sons of Bela and Zilpah tell us anything about the family's relationship or relations? We're talking about not getting off to a good start. How could this be an indication? Mixing? He wasn't with his family? Well, immediate family. Were they were brothers?
The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah were
Brothers
brothers of Joseph.
of Joseph.
Yes.
Oh, but he was with the sons of them.
Which is his brothers.
Which is his brothers? Or would it be his cousins?
No.
Brothers. Okay.
Those are Isaac's handmaidens.
Got it. Well, then, I don't know what I was thinking. Hold on. Now I'm off.
You actually had that on a shot up there about they were their children, a couple of back, 2 or 3 back.
There it goes. Right. I know. I'm not anymore. Let's read Genesis 37, 4 through 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw their fathers loved him more than all of his brethren, they hated him, and they could not speak peacefully unto him. And do you think they actually the actual harbored hatred towards him? The word or the cloak that was given to him, as we refer to as the coat of many colors, was in Samuel. It is known as a ketonet pasem, which is a cloak. And I was reading that the pasem implies the palm. The outfit went from the palm of the hand all the way to the ankle. Pas is the same thing as palm. I was just reading that as a trivial throw in. But based upon Genesis 37, which we won't read the whole 37, what word best describes that relationship between Jacob and Joseph was love. Can you think of a thematic connection to any other scripture concerning a special relationship between another patriarch and his son? Abraham and Isaac. There's more than that. Yep. There's more than one. Let's read Genesis 37, 5 through 8. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brothers, and they hated him yet even more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, you are binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaves arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood around and made obeisance to my sheaves. Based on those, what would be another characterization? He hated them more. They hated him more, correct? Did I go the wrong way again? Nope. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Do you really think he totally was innocent in conveying his dreams? You think he was? Yes. Or do you think that he had himself a little bit of maybe pride, a little bit of ego, because he was loved? What new word characterizes the relationship between the siblings? They hated him even more. What seems to catalyze the hatred of Joseph's brothers? The dreams. The dreams. What general theme would you suggest, since we have been talking about themes since the beginning of the Parshas, the actually beginning of the Torah portions? With Tony Robinson, he always works with the thematic connection. Now he's asking, what general theme would you suggest for these first 11 verses? That there is discord or chaos emerging in the nation. The Torah has done a great job of painting a picture of family discord from the very beginning by repeatedly using the word hatred. Do you think the nation of righteousness and justice will blossom from such an environment? Will it blossom? I think it might be a rhetorical question. Moving on to Joseph's descendant then into Egypt, which starts at Genesis 37 through 12. Would somebody like to read it? 12 through 14. Do you have the mic still? Are you going to read it? All right.
Then his brother went to the pasture, their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to them, I will go. And 14. Then he said to them, Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem.
So the Hebron is on a mountain, if you know anything about the geographics of it. Therefore, how can one be sent from its depths if it's a mountain? The Rashi, it says, notes that it is a mountain. The passage is, again, another subtle hint, because the word translated, that he used translated, could mean depth, vale, valley. It can also mean mystery, and as in a deep mystery. So rather than being from the depths, it could be a deep mystery. And that is a hint, another remez that he's going to lead to. In Genesis 37:15, would somebody like to read that? 15 to 17. Quite often, we run into passages that don't seem to make any sense. That usually gives us the good thematic information.
And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are, pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have moved from here, for I have heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
So does that make any sense when we move right into the descent into Egypt? He's immediately looking for his brothers. Does it say why he's looking for his brothers? Did it, in the previous scriptures, did it give any indication that they were lost? What's the significant fact? Genesis 15 through 17. Let me back up. These passages usually, for instance, we already know that Jacob had sent Joseph to find his brothers. Now this passage informs us that Joseph is seeking his lost brothers. And Tony says it's lost because in Joseph's eyes, they are lost and not where they're supposed to be. Note that it states that Joseph found them, implying that they were lost. And I do believe he's tried to draw a thematic connection there. Does anybody see that connection yet? Being a shepherd and has lost. All right. We have 4 more to look at. We're on page 8. Reading Genesis 37, 18 to 36. I'll read that. And when they saw him off afar, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said to one another, "Behold, the dreamer cometh. Now come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into the pit. And we will say, Some evil beast have devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said unto them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit that it is in the wilderness, and lay no hands upon him, that we might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again." And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that he was in, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, which their camels bearing spicery and palm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, "What profit is if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh." And the brethren were content. Then they passed by the Midianites and the merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and his rent clothes. And they returned his brethren, said, "The child is not, and I, whither shall I go?" And they took Joseph's coat, and killed a kid of goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, "This is what we have found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." And he knew it, and said, "It is my son's coat. The evil beasts that have devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in his pieces." And Jacob rent his clothes and put on sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. All of his sons and all of his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "For I will go down unto the grave unto my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him, and the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh's, the captain of the guard. So the question remains, did you hear any symbolism there? Anything that's significant to him being stripped of his tunic or his cloak? Yeshua. Yeshua. Let me go back up to. Anything else? He does stop here, and it does say that he will return again later to this. And I think what he's hinting at is now this is the second time he's drawing a connection. We hear about, more specifically, the 30, it cost them how much? 30 silver? And how much was it that it cost, was it that Judah? 30? So you can see the connection between Yeshua. Then when we read Genesis 15 to 17, went the wrong way. I'm still going the wrong way. Hold on. Apparently, so there's the symbolism is Yeshua, and he talks about that later in the portion. We're moving on to page 8, the apparent digression. Once we finished up this chapter, he is now sold to Potiphar, and from there, on 38, it starts out with, "And it came to pass that Judea went down from his brethren and turned a certain Amalite who was named Hira." We immediately start talking about Judah. Do we expect to see that? We're talking about him going to captive into, I'm going back up, being captive into Potiphar. I couldn't think of his name. Potiphar, in Egypt. He's now captured, and it immediately goes into Judah. Would you not expect to hear more about what happens? But in 38, it gives a story of Judah. And he notes in here, which, by the way, I did go to his site, and the link to this Torah introduction of the two houses is not there, even though he says it is on page 8. It talks about the connection to there is a relationship with Judea to the rest of his family when these events occurred. In other words, because of the fact that it says, "And it came to pass at that time," so it's the same time frame, just with Judah. And there is a connection there he makes with the two houses of Israel. He doesn't cover that because he wants to go back in. And the connection is that he's away from his family, having descended there in an area away from the rest of the family. So he's drawing and hinting at, with this connection, that not only did we have Joseph, we now have Judah, who now has descended away from his family. And then he goes on to back to 38. What does this verse remind you of? And we read 38:25. "She was brought forth, and she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man who these are, I am with child. And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose thee are, the signet and the bracelet and the staff." Now, if you remember, this is kind of having to recall, because he jumps to 25. The story of Judah is he ended up having with child. Is there a similar circumstance of that measure by measure? And the point of he was making here for Genesis 38 and then goes to 39 is the connection was that at the time frame is the same, and the connection between Judah and the two houses. And he discusses there that he talks about it later on. And we are almost out of time. There's a lot to cover. So we're going to go quickly to wrap up. In Genesis 39 and 40, so keep in mind 38 we didn't cover a lot of because there's a connection there between the two houses. That is something you'll have to study on your own. And then moving into Genesis 39 and 40, describing Joseph's new position. With his career with Potiphar, it states that Adonai was with him. He was successful in all that he put his hands to. His master knew that Adonai was with him, blessing him. He found favor in his master's eyes. The master gave Joseph the authority second only to his, and the Egyptian was blessed because of Egypt. Sorry. It was because of Joseph. Joseph also worked in a prison where he worked in the prison then. So after he was put into the prison, Joseph worked in a prison under a master, the prison warden. He found favor in his prison warden's eyes. The prison warden gave Joseph authority second only to his. In the prison, he was successful in all that he put his hands to. It states that Adonai was with him in prison as well. What are the two major differences between Joseph's two careers, if you want to call that? I don't know if I'd call it a career, but he does. Each step, he gets worse in a worse and worse predicament. He left his family. He's now in Egypt, and then he goes from Egypt, and he's now in prison. However, he wanted you to note that Joseph was the number one man in 3 different situations. Just as Joseph enjoyed a special relationship with Potiphar, the prison warden, so likewise he enjoyed a special relationship with his father. Just as Joseph was enslaved to the highest, and elevated to the highest position by Potiphar, and the prison warden, likewise, he was elevated to a higher position over his brothers by his father. Remember the multicolored coat. As noted by Ramden, just as Joseph enjoyed a special access to his previous bosses, so likewise he enjoyed special access to his father. Note that while his brothers were off with the sheep, Joseph was at home with the father. Do you think that his decent stature may have been a measure for measure, a divine judgment for his behavior? He, of course, thinks so. Before we go back to John 5, wrapping it up, I should say. So in this case, he's pointing out that even him going to prison, etc., was a measure for measure what he had done. He is getting his measure for measure reprimand for his behavior. Let me go to wrapping it up. I needed to read. I don't know. I only have a few minutes left. It's one of those cases where he always packs so much, and in reading it, you only can show so much in a time frame. The point of wrapping it up is John 5:46 says, "If you have believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me." And this we do not have time to cover, but I will encourage you to finish this. If you look at the pamphlet on page 13, he goes through, I'm just going to read a couple of them, how the sign of the Messiah and the resurrection of life. Joseph is a picture of the person who and the work of Yeshua Messiah, which Mike also had pointed out earlier. The sign out of the womb, that's on the bottom of page 13. The sign of the divine election. Then there was Joseph the shepherd. Then there was the one who was hated. Why did Jacob love Joseph over his brothers? The rejection of Joseph by his brothers. They all hated him even more on the account of his dreams. The messianic significance of Joseph's dreams. Joseph was sent to Shechem to check on his brothers and the flocks. He's drawing a picture there. He was seeking the lost sheep. The conspiracy against Joseph. Then they wouldn't kill Joseph themselves. Think about that. They didn't want to kill Joseph themselves. Does that ring a bell? They threw Joseph into a pit. Joseph was not in the pit when Revue went to rescue him. Joseph was stripped of his garments, sold for 30 pieces of silver. His kingly coat was dipped in blood. Jacob rent his garment and learned of that Joseph had died. Then there's Judah and Tamar, which we didn't cover. Then there's Joseph and Potiphar's wife, which we also didn't cover. Then there was Joseph the servant or the slave. He was a servant and a slave. Joseph being in prison. There were 3 branches on the grapevine, which equaled 3 days. There were 3 baskets, which equaled 3 days. The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. There's a lot of 3s in that connection. It talks about Joseph being the Egyptian. In summary, this is where in John he revealed that Moses wrote of him. And we all know and we can see it, and we've been seeing it since the beginning. Almost everything written in there is of Yeshua. I'd like to thank you for your study in the Word and looking at it. I encourage you, we just touched what we could. He has so much more, but the time that we have, we need to carry on to the wonderful message of Marcel. So let's end in the Torah, a blessing. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who gave us the truth of the Torah of truth, Yeshua, our Messiah, and set everlasting life in our midst. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah. Amen.